So, um, today's objective is to just look at one verse. Can you believe it? How long will that drama go on? We'll be done before they leave. Just kidding. So, our next look at the word world comes to us from John 13, the first verse, and you get two worlds in one verse. In John 13, you can look at your Bible and determine if they divided it up into two sentences, they just lied to you because it's all one sentence in Greek. So, and I feel sorry for, how we read different versions of the Bible, that we only get to read the New Matthew Bible, of whom I don't know anything about. We only get to read one verse from his translation. But we'll look at the interlinear tonight. So here we have this very important reference again to the Passover. And here it is read, John 13:1. Shh. Before the feast of Passover, when Jesus knew that his hour had come to depart out of this world to the Father, having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them. Oh, to the end, he loved them. Ooh, I messed that up. So, here's a great question. This is a very famous passage because this is the passage, John 13, where Jesus washes the disciples' feet. Does not seem to be in the other synoptic gospels. Something really significant as the washing of the disciples' feet. It's interesting that John is the one who really clues in on it. And there's a lot of important language related to what it means to be a follower of Christ, that we're to follow his example. And as I was contemplating the whole matter of the type of person Jesus is, so there's a big part of me that does not want Jesus to be a foot washer either. I want him on his throne. I want him glorified. I want him judging the nations. I want to see him in maximum power. That's what I want my Savior to be. So I kind of am like Peter in the sense of, what are you doing? This is so beneath you. This is not the way I want to remember you, is to do something so menial. And of course, in the Middle Eastern milieu, showing someone the bottom of your foot is a great insult. And so here's Jesus stooping down, removing his garment, stooping down and washing people's feet, which, as I understand, was a task of a servant. You'd expect a slave, someone who was a lower caste type person, to perform that type of task for the guests of a wealthy homeowner. And then here, Jesus does that. So, you get to speculate a little bit about that whole situation. You wonder if they ever ran with a crowd. Let's see. Isn't there one time Jesus visits a Pharisee? And he says, you didn't anoint my head with oil, and you didn't do this, and you didn't do that. Was foot washing a part of it? He goes down a list of things that you didn't do anything to honor me. But I was just wondering how many times this ragtag group of disciples went anywhere that they ever came into a situation where someone said, oh, foot washing time before dinner. And I guess also related to that, as it occurs to me, since they're all leaning next to each other, since they're at a triclinium, they're at a table they're not elevated like our tables. It's a low, maybe even sometimes just a blanket or a board that would serve as their table, and they're literally leaning on the ground. So to have someone's feet, if you almost would be next to someone's foot, eating a meal, you'd appreciate their feet being washed as you're dipping and partaking. So there's a lot of imagery, there's a lot of teaching there about who Jesus is and what he's teaching them. At first you won't understand this, but this is the way we're going to love one another. And so just presently, that's just a very impressive thing to me about what are the distances we're going to go to really love people and to show love, and how ineffective I am in thinking about, well, how low can I go to prove that I love this person? Usually it's like, they should know. They should know. And so I had I'm sorry, I'm going a little stream of consciousness here. I had a conversation with another pastor where someone really had done something very bad to him. And he ended up paying for the infraction, and he's like, he just like did everything. I heard what he did, and I thought, no way, I would never do that. All these things, and I'm like, that's really impressive. I need to think more about how I can forgive, how I can love, how I can. Because we all sort of have our own expectations of what should be happening. And so more thoughtfulness. And I think this is Jesus trying to make them think about these things. So back to the Passover reference, we've been charting that through 12, 6 days before Passover. The next day, there's going to be a special presentation this Sunday morning on a graphic that looks like this, about maybe sorting out things. We'll do some reflections. I've got a lot of questions to ask about it, because we have run into this interesting task of determining from all of the synoptics, from the Gospel of John, and then the way that the Jews counted days, because their day started in the evening, which my mind cannot figure it out. Day was when the sun comes up, but their day started when the sun went down. And so putting things together for which, if you say 6 days before the Passover, I still can't figure out what day that is, knowing that their day started in the evening. But now we're coming to the territory. This passage right here says, it has a subtitle, Christ washes the disciples' feet, tells them of Judas the traitor, and commands them to love one another earnestly. When we come to the Lord's table and we hear the words of institution, what is the very first thing we read? For what I have received, I pass on to you. That on the night that Jesus Christ was betrayed, it doesn't say on Passover. It doesn't say on the high holy feast day of Passover. It references a really dark aspect of Christ's life. And I read one little commentary that wanted to call this event in John 13 a pre-meal before the Passover celebration. And I don't know if pre-meal meant the evening before, or if it meant we're going to have a meal and then we're going to do the Passover observance. You know, we're going to have our meal first, and then we're going to do, you know, unleavened bread. And I don't know. It was an interesting reference. So that's just something I'd never thought of before, too. But we're not even going to get all to this. But verse 1 and verse 2, and when supper was ended, after the devil had put it in the heart of Judas Iscariot, Simon's son, to betray him. So this seems to me And in keeping with the words of institution, this seems to be some kind of Passover-ish observance. Was it the literal Passover? I just know people really debate the case. Especially when you read the other, I think it's in the other gospel, it says where Jesus says, I have earnestly sought to have this meal with you. So, all right, so let's get to our word world. Our world. That's like a children's show, isn't it? Word world. So Jesus knows that his hour had come to depart out of this world. Let us just go to our interlinear. Oh, I guess I don't even have set up. So the first thing that hit me was the reference to the hour had come. And I believe that Jesus is the main verb in this whole sentence right here. And I believe that the main verb, I tried to find it. I think it was that the hour had come. I thought that was the main verb too. But I'm going to be challenged on that. I remember a time in the beginning of the Gospel of John, Jesus would tell his mother, my hour has not yet come. And interestingly enough, he was at another type of a meal and celebration. And that this is his first miracle John records. And only John records the turning of water into wine at Cana. But now he has come, and now he knows that his hour is coming. And I was also reflecting about how so much of my life I never thought about dying. But after you hit 60, I think about it every day. It's going to come. So what am I going to do now to start preparing to depart? Jesus has got a lot more going on because he knows he's going to endure some very difficult things. He's going to be betrayed by a guy he's spent 3 years with, evidently, who had a different plan than Jesus. But you'll see here in the Greek language that the word Pascha, I noted that is actually a loan word from Aramaic, from the Aramaic language, which is sort of keeping in with John always using the local language. I didn't have time to look at what the other Gospels, I would assume they're using the same word. Pesach is Hebrew, Pascha is Aramaic. And knowing that his hour would come, that he would depart out of the world. Jesus has gone on and on to talk about how he was sent, that he's come from somewhere else, that he was sent by the Father. But I'm still trying to wrap my head around the concept that he knew he was leaving this world. We've been talking about world. He's departing out of the world. So what does that suggest? That he knows that he is a being whose entity will survive the death of his body, and that he'll have a conscious reference to a future space and location time that is not this world. He's going out of it. He's going to be where God is, the Father. So what does that mean for me, thinking that through? Philosophically, it reminds me that this world also isn't our final resting place. There is going to be a place where we will be disconnected from this world, but we will have coherent knowledge of being in a new location. Did you guys see that movie that they're trying to show? It's the people that Angel Studios. They've made a lot of Christian movies, and they're doing one about people dying. And they did all these past life interviews, and how interesting the trailer shows that a lot of people have similar experiences. The hovering above the scene, the listening to the conversations, then suddenly being whisked away toward light. But yet there were other people who weren't whisked away to light. They were noticeably brought to a very dark and foreboding place. So, I mean, these are people that have been revived, and they end up talking about what, I just don't know what kind of, there's just personal testimonies of people like, hey, I was above you. I saw that guy working on me, trying to revive me. You know, they know that these things happen. Well, I'm suspecting that Jesus is talking about maybe something even more real than that. That this world is the stage in which he is acting out all kinds of things for the purposes of the people whom he loves, which he's going to reference. Any commentary or thoughts about that? Jesus is leaving out of this world. He's completed his job.
If that means like his death, or if that means his ascension, because he's about to have the death, but then it's going to be a while before he actually ascends. That's
true. Yeah. Like 43 days later. Yeah. My first thought was, you know, that like talking to Nicodemus, I've been sent to this world. I'm sent here. This is where I've come. Indicating the fact that he comes from somewhere else, that he has some other existence somewhere else. And that God, in God's plan, included the world and a certain set of humanity in this world being particularly redeemed by Jesus. All right. So he's come from somewhere else. He's told us that he's going to a place of glory. And I think this is the passage where you get those verses where the word glory gets used like 5 times in one verse. It's all about glory, glory, glory. But all the glory you'd think could be related to him raising Lazarus and doing the miraculous. No, now all he wants to talk about glory is after washing people's feet and teaching them how they're supposed to treat one another. That's where everything's glorious. So this hour has been looming. He's been talking about an hour. Early on, he talked about the hour when people would hear his voice and people would raise from the dead. And then he's going to say he's going out of this world to the Father, patera, and having loved, and you can see that's that wonderful Greek word based on agape. It's not the philanthropic love. It's not eros, certainly, but Jesus has a self-giving, not motivated by feelings, love, whom he calls his own. Who were, that's interesting, who were in the world, to the end he loved them, agape again. So here's a preamble to the beginning of what seems to be the Lord's Supper. I've always taken it to be the Lord's Supper. I have to look at the passage more closer. We're not really going to go through this, though, because this is the only reference to world. But Jesus will say here in this preamble that his mission to the world were for the ones that he loved. And the wonderful word that we see here is the word telos. What is the telos of Jesus' ministry? What is the summation, the summary, the end product of Jesus' ministry. This is the word that's related to what Jesus says on the cross, tetelestai. It is finished. It is paid in full. So he's come into the world having loved his own who were in the world. To the end, he loves them. To what end? That's a good question.
To like redemption.
Right. And the fact that it's the word telos, it gives us the indication that it is something that's already accomplished. Noun, accusative, neuter. The telos of all things, the telos of Christianity, is that we would personally bear the image of Christ, that we would be sons of God, that we would inherit eternity. That is the end of what Jesus has done for us, who live in this world, a place that he does not dwell in. He created it. He came into it through the incarnation. He did everything that was required for someone to inherit this world. I guess he was meek, so he gets to inherit the world. And he did everything else that was righteous and pleasing to the Father. So there's nothing that disqualifies him from inheriting the world. But the only way that we could be co-inheritors is that he would have to do something on our behalf. So that's how he becomes our substitutionary sacrifice, substitutionary atonement for sins. And it will be to the end that his love for us will be perfected and we will be complete. We will share in his nature, in his righteousness, and everything that is pleasing to the Father will be our possession. That is our end. And that's why Jesus came into the world. So that seems to be very gospel-y. I mean, very gospel. How does that really impact us? Well, it should make us more informed worshipers, more grateful for what Jesus has done for us. It would help us to be a little bit more alert if people try to change the gospel into social programs or political objectives. Obviously, God's law is there to define society, but there's all kinds of things that they will take the Bible and tell me who the Antichrist is and what country he's coming from. I don't think that's the end for which Jesus came for us. So there's a lot of things that can get characterized in Bible preaching and popularized. We should be sure that we recognize what the end is, that Jesus came, and now he's coming to this hour. And for the Gospel of John, it seems like he doesn't want us to neglect the fact that Jesus is going to serve. He's going to do something very humbling, humiliating. He's going to even be more humiliated than what he's doing right now. But in the way that he's going to show love to his disciples, he's going to pursue a humiliating act. And I guess that sort of preaches, right? A person who knows Jesus, is changed by Jesus, is grateful for Jesus, ends up wanting to do things that Jesus has done. He's so greatly impacted for what Jesus has done for them, that they suddenly bear marks of Jesus in their life. So, preaching to myself right here, your speech should be pure, your motives should be pure, your standing up to defend yourself should be rare, in the sense that you should let God have the last word on things. So, but because this is all we have for the word world, I don't have much more to go. This world shouldn't be our world. Should it be our world? We should be redeeming. We should be agents of redemption in every possible way, as long as we remember to what end we're doing these things. I'm all for saving the environment. I'm all for not going to war. But this really does test my evaluation of what's love and what's service and what my role is in this world as a believer. Okay, someone be inspired right now and say something.
Maybe just, you had mentioned this section as the glory section where that word's used a lot.
Yeah.
You also get this hour word used a lot. So there is a contrast, it seems like, between these signs, like raising Lazarus from the dead, and that's not in the glory section. All the glory happens in these settings of humiliation, like the foot washing, allowing himself to be betrayed, allowing himself to be tried, and not really defending himself, being put on the cross. So it's like in all of this, it's kind of a backwards. Christianity is always almost backwards.
The upside down
Yeah.
kingdom. I remember that.
Yeah,
That
so his
reference.
glory comes through all of these humiliating events.
So you'd mentioned the word sign and glory. One commentator said sign is last used in 11, and so the word glory started taking over. We had all the signs, and all the signs point to who Jesus is, but certainly that's not enough for people to put together everything. A lot of people believe because of the signs, but there's a lot of people who don't. And now there's going to be a whole section. I guess the word sign gets used for its last time. I think it's the last time it's used in John from 11 is in chapter 20. So I think that's related to his resurrection. So yeah, now we're gonna. So good. Before we were really impressed with those signs, and that was the Jesus I want. That's the Jesus who can kick butt. But the Jesus who gets mocked and abused and doesn't stand up for himself, I have to know that Jesus too. I have to be familiar with that Jesus. So that comes back to that famous thing that even Gill knew about, that old 1700 Baptist commentator. He could find in the Jewish material that there was a Messiah who was the victorious Messiah, and then there was a weeping servant Messiah, because the Jewish people couldn't rationalize it being the same person, so they had two different guys fulfilling the Old Testament servant passages and then the kingly messianic passages. But it all becomes Jesus here. So I guess that's another good apologetic for the Gospel of John, being a very Jewish book. He gives us both messiahs. Well, I mean, we could read a little bit through 13. Let's see, we're only at 7:10.
You think the having loved his own who were in the world. Then it's a reference to the disciples and those who were with him, or just
Yeah, you want to. That is a good question. Certainly, in its immediate context, you're going to say yes. Just he loved his disciples. He, and Judas is mentioned in this next verse. I'm sure Judas' feet were washed, or did he skip right over him? So he could say, "Not all of you are clean." There's still loving actions toward Judas. I would have to say that the love that Jesus has for those who are his own in the world has a greater application for his particular redemption. So, I mean, when you get to John 17, okay, so here's the big change that takes place at 13. Long extended discussions, long monologues, long prayers. I mean, John 9? I think it was one of the longest sections of just covering an event. But a lot of the material really changes in John here. You get to John 17 and that high priestly prayer. In fact, I was reading some commentators that said we're now entering into 3 different books of the closing of John. Those chapters are like they're their own sections, like 13 through 15 is something, 17 through 19 and 20 and 21. But my conclusion on Jesus from John 17 is that he says, I am not praying for the world. I am not praying for the world. I'm praying for those whom you've given me. So that's all particular redemption language. It seems like it's mentioned, foreshadowed right here.
So I've been looking at all the Gospels, trying to figure out where and when things are happening. And so I think it is interesting. There's this huge discourse, and it seems like it is the night of his betrayal. So they're at this prearranged house. At the end of 14, he says, "Arise, let us go from here." So then I'm assuming there he's probably still talking to them as they go out to the mount.
After they had sung a hymn and went out?
Right, yeah. So they're going to the Garden of Gethsemane.
Yeah.
And, I keep thinking about rabbis, they look at something and then they're teaching, they're making a point. So the next thing he starts talking about is the vine and the vine dresser. Likely he's in a garden at that point. But yeah, it seems like all of this teaching that's several chapters in John were right at the very end of his life, and John records it all, just to have that ability to register all of that and later pin it down.
Yeah.
In other words, this isn't happening over several nights. This is all like one event over a few hours. I was just impressed when I was looking at it.
Well, if you watch The Chosen, all those disciples pull out little books and they start writing.
I don't think they were doing that. Maybe they were. I don't know.
I don't know. Because I'm watching some of The Chosen. Of course, they come up on my YouTube feed whenever anything's happening, and I know season 4 is coming, and there's a little trailer about Judas going to do his betraying work, and so it'll be interesting to see. I shouldn't be watching, but anyways, it's like a.
I'm curious, how many were they all educated to learn to read back then, or?
Oh, I think so. Yeah.
That was my thinking, or was it more like, only the certain few were educated to read, and then, like the fishermen and other people, man.
Well, wasn't the Pharisees that said about Peter, or was it? No, it wasn't Paul. It was Peter. These unlearned men.
Yeah.
So, I don't know. That just makes me think. I just wonder.
But Paul was taught by Gamaliel.
Gamaliel.
So I feel like some were obviously, but were his regular, just, you know,
So it seems to me that the Jewish people are a people of the word. So they know that what they do when they go to synagogue is they hear the word, they're supposed to read the word. I don't know to what degree they all had scriptures at their house. I do know that, they're supposed to put the mezuzah on the door. I don't know, is this biblical? They were supposed to have, it says about binding things like the frontlets on you. I mean, those are little scripture packages, So I think because of the Jewish commitment to recognizing God gave us his word, they were taught to read it, but yet there would be a difference between those who were untrained and trained in it. So I think in our modern culture, and I'm trying to remember, I saw a video that sort of showed how society has improved in so many measurements all over the world. And like since World War II, like life expectancy, the only reason my life expectancy was so low because World War II had just taken place and all these young soldiers had died. There was like 1,000 people dying every day, for almost a year in the world. But ever since then, all those measurements of things that are detrimental to society have been declining. And those things that are of benefit to society, such as people learning how to read. I mean, something like only 10% of the world doesn't even know how to read. I know there's pockets of places and maybe some cultures, but I would suspect that they knew how to read. Well, we have a Maundy Thursday service, and we have this tradition of combining, we call it a harmonization of all the passages of that relating to the Lord's Supper. So it was interesting for me today to have one commentary possibly challenge the fact that John 13 wasn't actually a part of the Lord's Supper, that it was something a little bit different. So like I said, I need to look at that a little bit more. And then while at the same time thinking, I'm not going to be looking at it because I'm using this word, I'm chasing this word world. My point in that is when we do our Maundy Thursday, I read like 4 full pages of conversations, and so much of it comes from the Gospel of John. It's all this unique material from the Gospel of John. So,
I mean, he does tell Judas, whatever you do, do it quickly. I mean that.
Right, and where's the comment where the disciples thought that he was running off to prepare?
Yeah, and yeah, it's right after that,
Yeah, because it does say that in verse 29. Since Judas had charge of the money, some thought Jesus was telling him to buy what was needed for the feast, or to give something to the poor. So if they're getting ready to have the Passover, that would lend more towards this isn't the actual Passover, right?
Yeah, that type of verse does that.
Yeah.
Makes
So
you say.
what feast? Wait, are we about? Didn't we just do the Passover?
Yeah.
Wait, what feast are we talking about now?
Exactly.
So it seems like all this happens on what's called Preparation Day. And you can still engage in commerce, you can still buy things, you're still preparing. But the actual Sabbath Passover happens the next evening. Then you're not buying stuff.
No.
It doesn't make sense to go out and buy stuff. Everything's closed because it's a hot Sabbath day. And also like go out at night. Like if you look at the Levitical law, you stay indoors because that's kind of what they did. You know, the death angel is out and about. So you're not singing hymns and then going out to a garden.
Wow.
You're indoors, right? So they're having this.
With your belt around and your sandals on and your staff with you.
Yeah, and you're eating the Paschal lamb. You're eating the Passover lamb that evening because it was killed during preparation day. So this is, but I agree. Like if you look at all the text, it kind of, this word Passover means so many different things.
Yeah, why don't you read that little shortly? That paper had 4 references to what Passover meant. It meant the 7-day celebration.
Right. The feast, the actual meal, Passover day, which is either Nisan 14 or 15, depending on how
or 16.
Depending on how you interpret, the Levitical
Where
law.
you are in the diaspora.
And then the lamb is also called Passover.
Mm.
So even New King James, it translates one of the verses, killed the Passover. It doesn't say killed the Passover lamb. It just says killed the Passover. On the day that they would kill the Passover is the way the New King James words
Amazing.
that. That's in, when the Passover must be killed. That's Luke 22:7. So it means several different things. And so it is tricky to sort out what day are we on, what's going on. And some of this cultural stuff is a little bit lost to us,
And it's a really big day because Passover is supposed to be preceded by this time where you're removing the leaven and you're preparing your home for this. You're even supposed to take in a lamb and watch a lamb for your family. And then for them, this is the beginning of their religious calendar. This is the beginning of their year, is this celebration of their freedom and redemption. So, but the Jewish people had this lunar calendar that can stick that day, all along any week, because the moon doesn't give us a full month's. There's this, as I understand it, as I'm remembering it, the Jewish people have this extra, we've got leap day, they've got leap month that they throw into the calendar to get the seasons back to winter and spring. And otherwise if they thought the lunar calendar, I think that's like a 28-day cycle or something like that, it really messes them up. So being exacting on those dates and having the rabbi from Jerusalem say, now that is the full moon, start celebrating, makes an interesting discussion. We can all do that with computers now. Everyone knows when, I guess even the Farmer's Almanac didn't even need computers. They knew when the sun was coming up and going down. But yeah, the difficulty has been to read with a honest mind all of the gospel accounts and seeing there's differences in how they're measuring the events. So this is why I've been drawn to this. Yeah, that's a Galilean observance. But then it really throws a wrench in it if I'm saying, okay, I'm fine with them celebrating Passover a night before. But John wants to celebrate it on the real Jewish Passover for the Jews in Jerusalem. So they wouldn't have been running outside if it was really that day. So here's the thing. Haven't we all been taught that when Jesus is on the cross, that is when the Passover lamb was slain?
Yeah.
Which from here would be the next day, right?
Yes. So
What do you mean by next day?
what I mean by that
4
is
hours later?
they can be running around outside because they're not violating Jerusalem's Sabbath and Passover date. They're celebrating it on their evening. not violating the Jews of Jerusalem's Sabbath night, because that's still to come, because Jesus is going to celebrate Galilean Passover as if he was in Galilee, although he's supposed to be in Jerusalem, because that's what Moses says. And they would observe everything as Galileans the night before, the 14th, and then the Jews of Jerusalem would celebrate it the next day, because that's their Passover observance on the 15th. And so everything that they're doing as Galileans, they would call Passover, just all happening the day before. Because the real Passover, and perhaps the high Sabbath, I guess your chart will help us with this. You know, Jesus is going to be on the cross. Well, he dies already. He supposedly dies when the Passover lambs are slain for that feast. So he's got to come down off the cross. You got to break the legs of the other criminals on the cross.
Before sunset.
Yes, so that day won't be, nothing will be shameful, I guess, on that day.
Doesn't it say like at the moment he gave up the ghost,
Yeah,
that it was noonday, and the
the darkness fell
darkness
over.
fell upon the earth, and the earth quaked.
What do they call it? The third hour? Is that the third
So
hour?
it's not about.
Sixth
I
hour.
don't remember.
Yeah, noon is the 6th hour from the 6th to the 9th hours when the darkness was. And
3 hours of darkness?
And then by that 9th hour, he's giving up his spirit. Yeah.
And says, Tetelestai. The telos has been done.
So you still have that day, even when they're killing the lamb, to get the leaven out. You know, you can still get
Yeah.
rid of all the leaven that
Yeah.
night too.
Wow.
And so I just think it's neat that here the Jews are, in their minds, they're getting rid of the leaven,
Ooh, of Jesus?
but it's, you know.
Yeah. Yeah. And then, of course, the discussion of the type of bread that's described there in the Greek, artos, is not a reference to leavened bread. Or matzah, the Shabbat really wanted, Shabbat.org really wanted matzah to be, they even named those days after matzah, matzot. So I'm still sticking with my Galilean Jerusalem observance until I can be swayed off it, because really making them all occur on the same day, I just don't think the synoptics match John's timeline. And if John was a Jerusalem-based Jew, as has been proffered, and not a Galilean, you know, he would be seeing it. He would still have to be seeing, he would have to say, they weren't really having the Passover because we have Passover in Jerusalem on the day that he's dying. Where all the guys from the synoptics are like, yeah, that was our Passover. That was Passover. It's the difference between baby dedications and baby baptisms. Everyone gets to call it a dedication, but one gets wet and one doesn't. So, was it real what happened there? I don't know why I said that. Okay. The Jerusalem guys would say that wasn't a real Passover because we do it on this day. So
they're going to have it twice. They're going to have Passover twice.
I'm telling you, the Essenes did it the day before the Galileans, and the Galileans did it the next day, and then the Jerusalem guys did it the day that they thought was the real day. And again, it accommodates everyone, the hundreds of thousands to 1 million people being in that city, celebrating it on the day of their choice.
It's just so weird because you've got the scene where Judas is basically betraying him, and all the disciples are thinking, oh, he's going to buy something to prepare for the feast.
So they're gonna do it twice, right?
So this is some sort of like warm up,
It is.
This is the warm-up feast. Then we
Or
have-
So the heart's
look at, it's John calling it the warm-up feast, but the Galileans think it's the real thing. But yet still, why are they saying they think he's going to go out to get something in John? I don't know. This is some giant book dissertation just waiting to be
Has
unraveled.
no one else here gone home for the holiday?
For Christmas. What are you talking about?
And you have to figure out what day are we gonna be where, which Christmas,
Yeah.
like when's Christmas and then when's Christmas with them and when's.
Yeah. Christmas Eve celebration with his family, Christmas Day with his family.
Major
I used to
holiday.
do that.
Yes. It's exactly.
Okay. That's very good. That's a good analogy.
So we got Passover, and then we have Passover. We might even have,
Passover Eve and then Passover.
and then post-Passover.
Yes. Very good.
The 12 days of Christmas, right?
All right. Well, I just have that one verse, but I'm glad you pointed out this verse 29 to us because this makes it healthy. And keep us all humble. Where I'm going now, you cannot follow, but you will follow afterwards. That's a lot of, man, that's a lot of interesting language. And then, yeah, okay, I'm going to keep on going. I'm going to call it quits. All right. And see where the Lord will take us for this Lord's Day. Pray, God, that your word would impact our thoughts and our thinking, that we would reflect certainly the servanthood of Jesus Christ, and with confidence knowing we can do that because he's the King. And so that our service has impact. It is not just menial and throwaway. It is still in service of the King. So we pray that you'd help us to embrace these truths and help us to not set all of our affections on this world, but yet on the world yet to come. That's our end. And we pray in Jesus' name. Amen. More talking to ensue.